This is the day that traditionally begins the celebration of Holy Week. And I always love, I love this story in Unity. I don't know, many of you may not know this, but I began working in Unity churches, working with youth ministry and in youth education, and in particular with the Uniteens. So if you're not familiar with Unity's youth education system, Uniteens are the middle school kids, the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I loved that age so much because there was this sort of in-between stage where they still loved to do the little kid sort of stuff, the coloring and the drawing and the being silly, but they also wanted you to know that they were aware they were too cool for that. But I always loved Palm Sunday with them because it turned into such a wonderful celebration after we got over what exactly Palm Sunday was. So if you're not familiar with this part of the story, this is the part of the story of Holy Week where Jesus enters into Jerusalem triumphantly riding on the donkey. And this was also the fun part with the Uniteens because it was the part where you got to say ass in church. So you got to say Jesus is riding in on his ass, and that got big giggles. Anyway, the point of this story isn't the celebration. It's the symbolism. It's symbolic of how we celebrate that presence of God as it shows up within us. So it's no coincidence that today we're talking about this idea of celebrating and knowing that presence of God is active within our lives. It's no coincidence that we choose Palm Sunday to celebrate our awareness of that presence of God. You see, we've all been exploring ways that we can transform our lives, ways that we can realize and see the presence of God active in our world, ways to see and know that the grand overall design is present and active in our lives. And as we explore these things, Spirit showed up in our lives in a new way. It showed up as new faces in Zoom. It showed up as a new way of being and connecting. Spirit showed up as a transformed community. And that brings us to Palm Sunday. You see, to me, there are many spiritual lessons present for us in the biblical stories about this week. There's lessons of surrender, lessons of overcoming, lessons of personal salvation, lessons that remind us that the presence of God is still present if we look for it. But this year, I really want to explore this day as a culmination of our spiritual journey. It's this idea that when we do the spiritual work that's necessary, the presence of God shows up in new and joyous ways. And so Holy Week begins, as we said, with the story of Jesus entering Jerusalem. And that story shows up in several of the different scriptures. I'm going to share one version of it from John with you today. And John is the more cosmic of the Gospels. It's the Gnostic Gospel, but this comes from John 12:12. And in John 12:12, the author of this Gospel wrote, "The next day, the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, 'Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel.' Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, 'Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt.' His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him." So that's a lovely story and all, but what exactly does it have to do with us? Well, let's first just back up and take a look at a spiritual journey from a higher perspective. As we do spiritual work to prepare our soul for a greater expansion of consciousness, as we forgive and give thanks, we prepare ourselves mentally and spiritually for this moment. The moment when our spiritual understanding arrives and enters into the consciousness of peace that is our soul. Now, this is a story about Jesus, and Jesus metaphysically, allegorically represents God's divine idea of us, but it's a story of that divine idea entering into the city of Jerusalem. So I took a look at what Unity's co-founder Charles Fillmore had to say about Jerusalem. And he wrote that Jerusalem represented that place of our soul where the consciousness of spiritual peace lives. It's something that grows as our realization of spiritual power grows. So if we want to apply this to our lives, we see it as the culmination of our spiritual work. When we do the work that we need to do in order to grow spiritually, the divine idea that we're nurturing finally arrives, and it enters into our consciousness, growing our spiritual awareness in return. And I realized something. You see, metaphysically, the story of Jesus entering Jerusalem is something that replays itself in our lives every time we have a spiritual awakening. We find spiritual truth that when we do the work we need to do and nurture our spiritual growth, a greater awareness of spirit arrives in our soul. And this is the message for us to take away today. This is the message we're choosing to see in the story at this time. We see the truth that we're capable of having the spiritual awakening in any moment, at any time, as long as we're willing to do the work that is necessary to grow our awareness. So our work is to grow forward from this time, knowing that we are always growing spiritually. We're here to keep our hearts open to the seeds that God has planted within us. We nurture those seeds. We watch them grow into the presence of God within us. You know, it reminds me of my journey over this past year working with Harper throughout kindergarten. And just as a side, I would like to offer a special blessing for all of you teachers out there, because it has been a wonderful journey, I guess is what we'll call it. But more than anything, my goal was to plant little seeds of curiosity with her. I'm not a kindergarten teacher. We stumbled through phonics every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but we got it done. But what we did was plant little seeds that within you is this knowledge, that you are a spiritual being and you have all the wisdom you need already within you. When you get overwhelmed, here's how you can calm down. And the idea that many of those seeds over time will eventually bloom instead of just one seed really resonated with me as I look around what's happening in our spiritual community. Because I have seen so many seeds sprouting around here. And I can't wait to see what's coming for each and every one of us next. I'm excited to see how each one of us continues to manifest that presence of spirit within ourselves. And so bless each one of you on your journey. And know that that presence is within you. There is, however, just one more thing. You see, the thing about endings and celebrations is that they often serve as the beginning of a new experience. And the thing to remember is that with any end, even the ones we celebrate, comes transition and change. The opportunity for something new, a new beginning. And with any new beginning comes change. And the one thing for us all to remember is that change is a process. I am only going to speak for myself, but I will admit to being guilty of having a, let's call it a Veruca Salt attitude when it comes to change in my life. You know, the idea that I want it now, I want it right now. I want the golden egg, I want the goose that can do the golden egg. So in an effort to not be identified as a bad egg, I've come to the understanding that the transitions we all face in life must be understood as a process. And just as we see through looking metaphysically at the Easter story, these times of transition can serve to grow us spiritually. Each one of us is going through a time of transition right now. Some of us are experiencing those transitions on individual, family levels as we deal with the loss of a loved one, with a relationship ending, with the loss of a job or an illness that's with ourselves or with someone we love. And on top of all of that, we're all experiencing the transition of a society that is preparing to emerge from the grasp of a global pandemic. An emergence that we know will have an impact, not only on what we do and how we relate to each other, but how we do life itself. In his book, Finding Yourself in Transition, Robert Brummett describes the transition process like being in a canoe going through white water. And if you've ever been whitewater rafting or canoeing and hit that white water, you know it can be both exciting and scary. That it can be a time filled with mixed emotions and lots of energy. But he has this to say about that process. He writes, "A transition is often a time of crisis. We generally don't like the experience of crisis. We may not even like the sound of the word. However, the Chinese language presents us with an interesting perspective on the word crisis. In Chinese, the word crisis is formed by a combination of two other words, one word meaning danger, the other opportunity. One rather poetic translation I have heard refers to crisis as opportunity riding on a dangerous wind. If we were to use the metaphor of sailing rather than canoeing, we could see the same principle at work. Transition may be an uncomfortable time, yet it is always a meaningful time. It is a time when the old order of our life is disrupted. It is a time when our old way of being is disturbed. It may even be a time when our sense of reality is challenged. Though painful, these can be extremely significant times in our life. Times of transition are wonderful opportunities to gain strength and wisdom, opportunities to experience spiritual breakthroughs and healing. Transition may provide the breakthrough necessary to live an entirely different life, not just the old life in a new way, but an entirely new life." Hear that again, not just the old life in a new way, but an entirely different life. And there's a lot of excitement in that idea, that we have the opportunity to transition and change into living a new life. But there is a caution in that. Remember, we don't want to be Veruca Salt and I want it now, I want it now, I want it now. We have to remember that every transition begins with an ending. Every transition begins with an ending. And whether they knew it or not, as Jesus and his followers entered Jerusalem that day, an ending and its transition had been set in motion. However, in that ending, something wonderful was about to transpire. Something else was beginning, and it is that beginning that we both celebrate next Sunday and look for inspiration on our own journey, or look to for inspiration on our own journey in consciousness. T.S. Eliot, the poet, wrote this following line. He wrote, "What we call the beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from." The end is where we start from. And so we ask ourselves as we move through our transitions, what is beginning? What seeds are being planted? What is springing forth in our consciousness? And as much as we can sit in a place of knowing what is coming and understanding that in this ending is the space for something new to be created, as I've said, there's a caution in that. And that caution has to do with time. I don't know about you, but I was not blessed with patience. My mother, my father, they blessed me with many, many things, but patience was not one of them. However, when it comes to a transition, we have to remember that that transition is a process, and it's one that requires us to be present to it. We want to jump ahead to the harvest, and it's our nature, but the process involves planting seeds, tending soil, spending time in darkness, emerging, growing, getting stronger, bearing fruit, and then the harvesting. As we dive into the endings, it's important to stay present to what is in that moment. It's important to honor the ending. I mean, look, I get it. Endings are rarely fun. There are the endings we celebrate, sure, graduations, retirement parties, weddings, but there are those endings that we tend to not celebrate. Divorces, job losses, death. And when we're confronted with these endings, we have a tendency to want to move past it as quickly as we can. Bring an end to the pain and move on. However, when we do that, we understate the importance of the thing that is ending in our lives. We don't give ourselves time to move through a transition process. And in doing so, we create that rocky, poor soil that we were warned about by the master teacher in his parable about the sower. We feel we have to stay strong or put on a brave face for those around us or for those who need our support. And in doing so, what we're really doing is moving into a state of denial. Denial about what it is that we're experiencing. And a denial of the feelings of grief that are surrounding the loss of what we thought was. And so we shove that grief down because we want to appear like we're strong, or we want to appear like we've got this, or our family needs us because I'm the one that always holds it together. And we don't honor the ending that is happening. And we don't allow ourselves to feel that grief, to feel that sadness, to feel the worry and the anxiety. We undermine and understate how important the event was to our life. And the risk, of course, comes when we face our next transition, because we run the risk of having it trigger that grief from our past, which can lead to us pushing it back down again until it becomes an unavoidable tidal wave of grief, anger, rage. So as we encounter our endings, we can do so realizing that in this ending is an opportunity for a new beginning. The opportunity to know ourselves and our spirit that much better. And while that's exciting, I do think it's fair to say it's not comfortable. So how do we deal with that discomfort when it shows up? Well, unity has taught us a powerful tool to use in times like this. Unity was founded on the idea of prayer, on the principle of prayer. And one of those prayer principles is the idea of affirmations and denials. The idea that we can be with the worry, the grief, the thing that we're experiencing. We can be with that discomfort and use this prayer process to deny that it has power over us. Because what we know to be true is that there is one power and presence in our lives. And we can do this from a place of knowing that we're not denying the experience. We're not denying the reality. We're not doing denial in the sense of we're avoiding our grief. What we're doing instead is reclaiming our power as we remind ourselves that yes, the grief is what we're experiencing. We're honoring this ending, but we choose to not allow that grief to have power over us, because the presence of God is the one that has power over us. It's the one thing that has not power over us, has power in our lives. That's the better way to state that. See, it's important to note that we are not denying we are going through something. We are denying the power it has to make us feel the discomfort. We deny the power that something has over us and affirm the truth that the grand overall design is supporting us in all that we do. Emily Cady wrote about the concept of affirmations and denials and lessons in truth, and she's created a wonderful affirmation for these times when we're faced with the uncertainty of transition. I'd like to share it with you now. That affirmation is, there is nothing to fear. Absolutely nothing to fear. Perfect love reigns, and all is well. Peace be still. There is nothing to fear. Absolutely nothing to fear. Perfect love reigns, and all is well. Peace be still. In those moments, when you're feeling the grief of an ending or the anxiety of uncertainty, join with us in closing your eyes, taking a breath in, and knowing that there is nothing to fear, absolutely nothing to fear. Perfect love reigns, and all is well. Peace be still. Knowing that, we can sit with and honor the emotions that we're feeling in the ending, and yet not allow them to overcome and control you. You see, I want you to hear me very clearly when I say it's okay to feel disappointed. It's okay to feel overwhelming sadness or to feel afraid when something bubbles up. You see, these are very real emotions. And these are very real situations that you're being confronted with and that you're living through. Remember, we're not denying the experience. We're only denying its power over us. I also want you to hear me when I say there is a way to take our power back. Things are going to bubble up for you from the surface for you to deal with. Whether you like it or not, they're going to show up. Those issues, those things, those people, they're always going to be there to confront you. What I want you to know is that you do have control over your feelings about the situation. It's easy to allow these things to shake you from your path, especially when they appear too difficult to deal with, too painful to go through. And this is an idea that we see reflected in the prayer that Jesus offers in the Garden of Gethsemane. See, on Thursday night of Holy Week, Jesus and his disciples, shortly after the Last Supper and that beautiful painting that we have, we can all picture that painting of the Last Supper in our mind. After that, Jesus goes apart from his disciples to pray. And when he does, this is the prayer that he offers. This is from Matthew 26:36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible to let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." If it is possible to let this cup pass from me. for us, that fear and that doubt can take over in just a second. And just as Jesus sat in that garden and prayed to have the cup taken from him, we too would willingly hold that same desire when faced with the fear and the doubt that transitions can cause for us. I mean, am I the only one here watching this now that's guilty of, at some point over the past year, praying, oh, please let this pass over me. Please take this away from me. I don't want this right now. This can go over there right now. I don't need this. Please just don't let me deal with this. However, just like the example we have from our master teacher in this story, we have to reach the same conclusion that Jesus reaches. It's not my personal will. It's not mine to resist the transition. It's not mine to resist the change. It's mine to surrender to the will of the grand overall design as it's expressing through me. And to trust, as I do, that there is a new beginning that is being born out of this ending. But for right now, I simply need to sit with what is and honor those emotions that I am feeling as this ending approaches me, as I move through this ending. And so we turn to our affirmations. We affirm that it's not my will, but thy will is done. We deny the appearance of the power that this thing has over us. And we affirm the truth that the power and presence of Spirit is greater than anything in the world around us. We ease into the emotion of what is, and we allow the will of Spirit to be done. Because what we know is true is that with every ending comes a beginning. And that as the ending approaches, a new beginning shows up. And so as we move through this time of transition, whether we're experiencing a transition on a personal level, or we're just sitting there waiting for that vaccine and the return to a life that we hope is at least similar to what was, the invitation for us in this Palm Sunday experience is to celebrate the ending, to be present to the ending, to be aware that we are in the midst of ending, and to know that as that transition moves through and we stay present to it, our growth is assured. And so for right now, we stay present, sitting in this moment, ready to be and do all that we need to be and do, ready to support one another as we emerge from this time, a new and greater expression of the light that we are. And so for that light and all of you, I see you and I bless you. Namaste.